to the show. I'm Phil Vischer. I'm here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil.
Hi, Christian. You're pretty in orange. And Sky Jitani.
Hi, Phil.
Drab and
Anyone else have deja vu?
I'm really having
We
deja vu.
started the show, and I forgot to press record on the audio.
We had a great show for you,
We had
folks.
a great conversation. So we actually have to make the show kind of quick now because Sky has a meeting in half an hour. Hey, it's podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's podcast. We have video. Hey, it's podcast. Linda. Phil, your podcast starts right here. We'll talk Sky.
Hey.
Christian, too.
Hi.
And we don't got a guest because there's no time for a guest for you. Hey, it's Podcast Linda here. The Phillips Podcast starts right here. The Phillips Podcast starts right here. Okay, so we got a letter. I honestly did. We did about 20 minutes of really riveting conversation, and then I noticed that I forgot to record it. Oh, and
now your computer's
Now
dead.
my computer doesn't want to.
Phil is having a really bad day.
Hey, we got a letter. Hey, we got a letter. Hey, we got a letter from Jonathan Clausen who says it was great to have Christian back.
Thanks, Jonathan, and everybody else. I loved your notes.
And Christian's back. I curate a group for Game Church, which we believe is a Christian gaming.
Which sounds very interesting.
Game church.
Game church.
Right.
Yeah,
Or
Church of Gamers.
Church game.
First gamers church.
I posted a question to them for discussion. How do you interpret magic used in video games? That led to a long discussion thread on what exactly is magic as the Bible refers to it. Can you and the crew elaborate on what this magic is? Then I went and did a little search and found how many places the word magic comes up in the Bible, and it was actually more than I thought. It comes up quite a bit, including, and this is interesting, the story of Simon the magician from Acts chapter 8. But there was a man named Simon who had previously practiced magic in the city and amazed the people of Samaria, saying that he himself was somebody great. So we've established there is magic in the Bible.
Yeah.
Which is accessing supernatural forces. Because we also believe that miracles would qualify as that's what miracles are.
We're taking a modern term and trying to retroactively apply it to things.
Which one's the modern term?
Well, the way we typically use magic.
Oh.
Whether we mean the illusionist entertainment in Vegas kind of magic is not what we mean, but the magic that is tapping into supernatural forces to and controlling them.
So you don't think Simon the magician would saw a woman in half?
Probably
to
not.
Impress the Sumerians?
No.
Okay.
Not in the way we would think.
But he could turn a staff into a serpent.
Maybe.
Because there were magicians that did mimic those
And which is where the word magi comes from.
Right.
Or the word magic comes from. Which one came first?
Magi. Or magicians. Okay, so here's in the ancient world, like you see this in the story of the Exodus, where the Egyptian pharaoh had magicians, right, who contended with Moses.
Yeah.
These are often seen as advisors to royalty, as the Magi were in the Nativity story, who are very knowledgeable and wise, and often what they would use is some kind of divination, meaning activities that would give them the ability to understand the times or predict the future. So astrology, for example, which is what the Magi did when they looked up into the stars and they saw that, hey, a king has been born in Israel, we're going to go check it out. Or more common in the ancient world was sacrificing animals and then taking out their organs and
reading their entrails.
To try to understand, well, are we going to have victory in this war or not, or what should the king do?
A good spleen before bed. Curl up with a cup of tea and a spleen.
So these were all practices that God strictly forbid his people from engaging. So, for example, when the Israelites sacrificed animals at the temple, they were told that the entrails of these animals were to be burnt completely. They were to be destroyed because other cultures would use them for divination.
Right.
So the issue, usually when evangelicals or Christians talk about magic or the supernatural or witchcraft, that kind of stuff, they usually differentiate it or make it bad because what you're doing is trying to engage with evil spirits, evil and dark forces. That's actually not
Which probably can't be good.
No, it's probably not good, but that's not actually what the scriptures forbid. Because even in areas where the intent would be to engage the true God or the Spirit of God, as Simon does in Acts chapter 8.
Right, he wants the power of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And he wants to buy it.
And Paul freaks out on him and condemns him for it. So in the Old and New Testament, even when your intent is to try to engage with the good side, right, the Spirit of God, even that is strictly forbidden. Because what it all has in common is these forms of magic or divination are all attempts at controlling deities or controlling spiritual forces. And that's what God's people were strictly forbidden to do. They were not supposed to seek ways of controlling God to get him to do what they want. Instead, in the Old Testament, what differentiated the Israelites from all these other ancient cultures and their gods is they were supposed to have a loving relationship with God. And they were supposed to trust him. That's why the highest call is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's not what the other ancient pagan cultures did. Their goal was to try to control their deities.
Right.
And that's what magic is about. It's about controlling forces, which is just a perpetuation of the rebellion of Adam and Eve in the garden. It was about trying to be greater than God and control him.
Well, and that goes back to what you were talking about in With. Right? Where at the core, it's us trying to be in control and control God.
Right.
But the different postures are different ways that we try to do that.
Right. And all of that control is rooted in our fears. When you're afraid, you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
What's going to happen in my kingdom? What's going to happen in my family?
How do I control my environment for my security?
And in that fear, in the ancient world, the best way to try to gain control over deities was through these practices of divination. Mm-hmm. Now, what we need to realize is we're still doing the same thing all the time.
No, we aren't, Sky.
We just do it in different ways.
No, Sky.
Yes, we are.
Well, so you're saying that that America is a pagan culture?
No, I'm saying America's full of people, and people
are still trying to control God.
Still trying to control God, including a lot of the way we practice our Christian faith is really a form of divination.
But as a gamer, and you're up to your eyeballs in virtual magic, on your virtual games, I think one thing they're kind of asking at here is there magic in a biblical worldview?
Yes.
Okay, let me just clarify this question.
Okay.
Do you think he's saying, if I play this video game that has magic in it, I'm doing a bad thing?
No, I think that's a separate question. I think the first question is, because we're so drawn to whether it's Harry Potter or even Narnia or, even superheroes. I mean, superheroes, it's a form of magic. You have...
Some of them are just magic, like they're coming out with Doctor Strange.
Yeah,
soon, right?
just magic.
Right.
And we're all attracted to this access to supernatural power. Right.
Suspending...
We love that storyline.
And being able to control it.
Yes. So then the question is there magic in a biblical worldview? Which the answer is yes.
Because we believe there is a supernatural power.
There's a spiritual reality. There's reality beyond nature. And there is power, whether it's good spirits, God, angels, whatever, or bad spirits. There's power, and people try to access that power. We're not saying only try to access the good power for your benefit. Don't try to access the bad power. What we're really saying is you have a relationship with God. You're not trying to control God.
Right.
You're not trying to access the power for good or bad. You want a relationship with the source.
Right.
Is that what we're saying?
Which is interesting. I mean, you said when we weren't recording, I was about to say in our last podcast.
In our practice podcast, which was going wonderfully, much better than this one.
You said that you received a letter from a girl you were corresponding.
Yes, a girl I was corresponding with over a couple of years who was a fan, who said, I think I'm giving up on prayer because I just can't figure out how it works. And I thought, well, that's America. It's like, I'm not saying the words right. I'm not. There's a famous Charlie Brown cartoon where Schroeder is that Lucy's little brother.
Yeah,
he's the piano player.
Yes. He turned. No, it's Linus. I think it's Linus. Linus is the spiritual one. That's Lucy's little brother.
Right.
Schroeder is Lucy's
Linus
love
is the
interest.
one that reads the scripture in Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yes.
And he's got the blanket.
Linus is kneeling, and he has his hands together to pray, but he's pointing them down. And he says, if I put my hands down when I pray, do I get the opposite of what I'm asking for?
No.
And it's like 1950 whatever, but it's Charles Schulz just saying this is how Americans look at prayer, that's a magical incantation, and if we do it right, we'll get what we want.
And that's true of pretty much all people in all cultures in all places. It's
not
how
just America?
No, it's just our human inclination is and perhaps our sinful inclination is to believe that we can have control over the cosmos, over our circumstances, over our future. And I mean, Jesus speaks about this. He says in the Sermon on the Mount, the pagans pray with many words because they think that they'll be heard. Because if they just say the right words and they say them frequently enough, that the gods will have to listen to them and do what they want. And this is the same thing in the Old Testament. If you make the right sacrifices, if you do the right things, this is what the book of Job is all about, then God will be in your side. And that's not what Jesus taught, and it's not what even in the Old Testament, God reveals.
And
to
it's
his
funny
people.
in the story of Joshua, when the angel of the Lord, the head of the Lord's army, appears to him, and Joshua says, "Whose side are you on? Are you on our side or are you on their side?" And you expect him to say, "Well, I'm on your side. You know, God's on your side." And he says, "Neither."
Right.
Huh. That's like the football game.
Neither.
Everybody thinks that God's on our side and we're going to win. If I pray that we win, then God wants us to win.
Yeah, but it's like you called us to attack them. So what do you mean you're not on our side? Like, no, I'm not on either side. I'm God.
And that is the fundamental problem with all human religion, is it seeks to control God through all kinds of different methodologies to get what we want, when the true call of God is not to control him, but to submit to him, knowing that he's loving and good, and live in communion and relationship with him, so that I don't have to control him or control the future. I can entrust myself.
But we do
to
have
him.
access to power.
Yes, but it's not because
if you have as much faith as a mustard seed, I could move that mountain over there. That's what it says.
Well, not exactly.
Well, some people may think that.
It says if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain to move, and it will move.
Well, how is that different than what I said?
Because faith in and itself is not where the power comes from. It's what you have the faith in. And if God tells me to tell that mountain to move, if I believe him, it will. Because it's his power that's doing it, not mine.
Right.
So faith,
but to your point, we have power. We have access to power.
Yeah.
we do, but it's not power that we control. It's power that controls us.
That's deep. Well, can I say one more thing about this?
Yes, you can.
So really, it sounds like to me what I hear you saying. They taught me to say that in counseling.
Active listening, very good.
Yes.
What I hear you saying is that, truthfully, even as Christians, we went a little far afield with the magic discussion. But what I hear you saying is that even as a Christian, when I am praying, it's about talking to God and establishing that relationship and being with him, not saying, I'm going to pray in this certain way and I'm going to expect this certain result.
I have my devotions every morning, and I read through the Bible in a year, and then I tithe religiously.
Right.
God will be obligated to give me what I want.
Yeah.
Right. That's just hogwash.
Right.
Really. That we have invented. It's sort of like our Americanized, Christianized way of.
We've been doing it forever. I'm thinking about the Middle Ages and the development of the traditions of even paying indulgences. Paying indulgences or do 35 Hail Marys. I mean, we developed all these traditions because we want to be able to say, I've figured out a system, and now I don't have to worry so much about a relationship.
I remember when our son Isaac was born prematurely and had all kinds of health issues, you feel so helpless and so out of control and so, just beyond yourself. And the temptation is, okay, God, I'm going to bargain with you. And I'm going to pray, I'm going to pray, I'm going to pray, I'm going to give, I'm going to give. And I remember somebody handing me a prayer of St. Jude or somebody, you say this prayer when someone is sick. And in the sense that if I just do enough spiritually, God will intervene and heal my child. That's one way of approaching it. The other way is to go before God our Father, who loves me dearly, and as David did when his son was sick, and plead and from the heart say, this is desperately what I want. But at the end of the day, trusting that you love me, you love him, and I will submit to what you want. And so, both on the outside, you might see two people in that circumstance, both fervently praying to God, but one of them is doing it in an attempt to control God, and the other is doing it in an attempt to draw closer to this God that I know loves me, and expressing myself and then surrendering the outcomes to him. One is a faithful form of prayer, the other is a divination. It's a form of trying to control God. So you can't just look at the external behavior and go, well, one person is doing right and one's wrong. It's all about the posture of the heart. And that's what's so hard for us to understand is as long as we're in this posture of wanting to control God, pretty much everything we do in our Christian life is going to be completely skewed wrong.
Well, you know what I think is so cool? It's kind of scary, but at the same time, it's really wonderful.
This guy's haircut.
That's kind of true.
It's a little Voldemort-ish, isn't it?
But I like it.
As long as you keep your nose, I think you're okay.
If I'd lose that, I could make a lot of money, though. Like a impersonator.
Rent a Voldemort for
I could be your agent.
kids' birthday parties.
What I think is really cool is that because he calls us into relationships are unpredictable. and they are kind of messy.
You think that's cool?
And
It's terrifying.
No, it is terrifying. But what is so wonderful about it is that he cannot be boiled down to a formula, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
Because what that means is we have to constantly, every day, be engaged with him in listening and in talking and in walking. And, he can't be controlled. And that may be a scary thing, but it's a wonderful thing because then, every day is new with him. And I think that's cool.
It's only not scary if you're convinced that he loves you. That's why. That's why when
deep.
John says, the
true.
core message that John reveals that he got from Jesus in his epistle is that God is light. There's no darkness in him at all. If you've come to see God that way, then you don't have to be afraid of him. Perfect love drives out fear. Then you can let go of your attempts at controlling. But if you're still not sure, if you think he's really not that good, or he's really not, in favor of you, then you're going to continue to try to control him.
So you're right. It all does come down to fear.
Which leads to the dark side.
Right. According to Yoda.
It can.
Okay.
Let's go. What's
Christian
next?
theologian demoted for preaching peace.
That sounds contradictory.
On Tuesday,
Sounds Christ-like.
On Tuesday, February 10th, Dr. Randy Beckham addressed students at Mid-America Nazarene University's regular chapel service. His message was in response to two films which had recently made headlines, American Sniper and Selma. Dr. Beckham serves as the university's chaplain and was the vice president of community formation. He questioned the prevalent culture surrounding Christians in the United States, which champions a killer above a preacher who taught nonviolence. Here's a quote from his talk. As you know, two movies came out recently. Selma, the story of one of the 20th century's most influential Christian leaders, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who led a nonviolent movement that changed the course of American history forever. And American Sniper, the story of the most deadly Navy SEAL sniper in American history.
Didn't that movie just it's got like the highest grossing movie of the year or something like
Yes.
that?
Close, yeah. Selma has made 29 to 30 million so far. American Sniper made over 103 million in the first 4 days. Gives you an idea about who our heroes are. I don't think it is an understatement to say that our culture is addicted to violence, guns, war, revenge, and retaliation. Unfortunately, so are a lot of Christians. He went on to say, we have to be very careful about equating patriotism with Christianity. We never say God and anything. God is above all, and everything else is underneath. That was on
That doesn't sound very controversial.
Tuesday. On Monday, the following Monday, Dr. Beckham was relieved of his vice presidency. Rumors persist that it was high financial contributors to the university and denominational leaders inside of the school who felt that the statements undermined the integrity of the university.
So it was the money. Follow the money.
Yeah, fury and debate erupted across the Olathe, Kansas. Olathe? Is that a city?
Olathe?
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 Olathe. I think it's Olathe.
Olathe?
Olay. Maybe it's like a, chips and salsa kind of town.
This is a very confusing story to me.
Many
What did he
believe that
say that's so
Beckham's-
controversial?
I think it was not patriotic, or it was critical of the military.
It was not supporting our gung-ho military culture.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it was supportive of the civil rights movement and Dr. King, who in some people's view was, not a hero.
This is very sad.
Isn't that a little bizarre? It doesn't make a very good statement about the church for people that are watching in the news.
I can't name names or organizations, but I had a friend who used to work for a Christian organization, and he was tasked with doing something, and he did it. This is so vague. This is like the vaguest. I promise I'm not talking about myself. Anyway, he did it very successfully and very well, and immediately after was fired.
Yeah.
And the reason was he did it. He met all the metrics that he was tasked with meeting, but he brought in some voices to help him do that some of the donors to this organization did not like. And at the end of the day, even though he achieved his goals, the big money donors to this organization took issue with how he did it, and they fired him.
Wow.
So it's a lot of times the donors have an enormous amount of influence on these organizations, and if they don't like what's going on, they can threaten to pull
They
their funding.
like to control.
Right. And we've woven together patriotism and Christianity so thoroughly
And politics.
and politics and everything else that we've kind of made a mess, which leads me to the next story, which is the bigger story. And this is a piece written in the New York Times on March 14th called "A Christian Nation Since When?"
This sounds juicy.
That's not
Controversial at all.
provocative.
Since the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock.
And said, "We found the United States of America this day without freedom of religion."
What day did they land? Do you remember?
In 1492,
That's
Columbus
Columbus.
sailed the ocean blue.
That wasn't the Pilgrims.
That wasn't the Pilgrims.
That was
It was 1600 something.
1621.
They
wasn't it?
landed on Thanksgiving Day.
No, they did not.
So,
but it was right before the winter.
yeah, not a good time to land.
No,
No.
in
that-
Massachusetts,
a
especially.
bad
Good
idea.
thing it wasn't this year. Did you guys
Oh,
hear they had
boy.
like 108 inches of snow this year? That was awful.
They
I
must
feel
have-
sorry for you,
They must
Boston.
have done something to
Yeah,
disobey
it's because
God.
they've turned away from God.
Right.
Stop it.
A Christian nation since when? Just a few weeks ago, public policy polling reported that 57% of Republicans favored officially making the United States a Christian nation.
Which in and of itself is hysterical.
Why is that
What
hysterical?
does it even mean?
Because
Do they even
I
know
mean,
what it
it's,
means?
Yes. Okay.
What does
I'm
it mean?
I am a Republican. Let me tell you, I was about to say just a
Okay.
few minutes ago that where I grew up, there was no such thing as a liberal Democrat.
Yeah.
A conservative Democrat. You could not, if you
Okay, if you were conservative.
you were a Republican.
Well, that salt switched in 1965. There used to
Right.
be a lot of Dixiecrats.
That's true, but it
Yeah.
all changed
Right.
right around then. Anyway, I will tell you, yes, most Republicans believe that this is a Christian. Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't generalize and I shouldn't say most.
Yeah.
But in my
What
experience,
about your father, who worked in the Reagan administration?
fortunately, he doesn't listen to this. But all of this, so I could say this. I actually worked in the Reagan administration also.
Okay.
Wait a
And,
minute.
Well,
In what capacity?
I worked on Capitol Hill.
Was the Secretary of Education.
And I
Didn't
would,
you know that?
And I would go to the White House. Does that count?
Well, you worked on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I worked on Capitol. I was a press secretary at
For
the
who?
Senate Republican Conference.
Okay. Okay.
So it's for all the Republican
So you
senators.
worked in Washington in the government during the Reagan administration.
Yeah, and I would go to the White House.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had errands and I would be there. So
Yeah.
I was in the building, not the administration.
They would
Anyway.
always announce, "Christian is in the building."
Okay, can we get back on task here?
You'll
Speaking
know
of-
her. She's
speaking of-
bright orange.
Speaking of magic and divination,
Yeah.
I mean, the Reagan,
whoa.
Nancy Reagan used
yeah.
astrology
She
to
did.
determine when to sign
That was
different treaties
the,
and
the
stuff.
Christian Republicans in the Christian nation did not
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that.
that was a big deal.
Anyway, so
Okay.
truthfully, they do think that this was a Christian nation based on the Christians like Thomas Jefferson.
He was not a Christian.
I know that.
Yeah.
And, Benjamin Franklin.
he was-
Who wasn't. I mean, there was a whole bunch.
Further.
But if you go into the monuments and you read readings that Thomas Jefferson wrote
Yeah.
without knowing
Yeah.
the whole background, it sounds like
Right.
we were a
Right,
Christian
right.
nation. So they
Right.
just only go that far and they say, we have been a Christian nation since it was founded.
But
Okay.
what does it mean? What does it mean in that survey? 57%.
Yeah,
right?
57% of Republicans favored officially making the United States a Christian nation. What does that
see,
mean?
what I find so funny about that is Republicans, and I would like to believe Democrats also, strongly believe in the Constitution, right? They're always
Right.
defending the Constitution
Right.
or attacking their opponents
Yes.
for not defending the Constitution absolutely forbids
No religion.
creating an official religion.
Yeah.
So when they say 57% want Christianity to be an official religion, then you're saying 57% of Republicans don't want to support the Constitution.
Well,
I don't think they think it that far.
that may or may not
Well,
be.
that's a problem.
But in a 2007 survey by the First Amendment Center, 55% of Americans believed it already was a Christian nation.
Which is really an indictment of our education system.
It's a,
I agree with you.
Thank you.
The confusion, I'm reading from the New York Times story, the confusion is understandable. For all our talk about separation of church and state, religious language has been written into our political culture in countless ways. It is inscribed in our Pledge of Patriotism, marked on our money, carved into the walls of our courts and our capital. Perhaps because it is everywhere, we assume it has been from the beginning.
That's what I
But whoa,
said.
whoa, whoa! Let's take a step back. Wait. All those things he's referring to there, I think it's a
Yeah.
he in the article.
Yeah, he.
Are not Christian. They say God,
Yeah.
in God we trust or whatever, but they're not in Jesus we trust. They're not explicitly Christian. They're just
Right.
deistic almost.
Right, and I think
Okay.
back then, correct me if I'm wrong, you know history better than I do, but And they were talking about a God in a very Unitarian sense.
You go way back when
Yeah.
it was, somewhat deistic.
They all kind of had deities that they believed in or their own idea of religion. And so they just decided
They didn't know any atheists.
Right. They
True.
talked
So-
about
and-
creation and,
and-
creation's God.
And they knew very few polytheists. There were not a whole lot of Hindus running around Washington
Right.
in the 18th century. Well, there wasn't in Washington yet, but that's beside the point.
Right.
So let me continue.
Go ahead.
Continue, Phil.
But the founding fathers didn't create the ceremonies and slogans that come to mind when we consider whether this is a Christian nation. Our grandfathers did. Dum, dum, dum. Okay. This is
He's excited
He's
now.
got a point.
this is interesting. Back in the 1930s,
gonna
business
sit
leaders found themselves on the defensive. Their public prestige had plummeted with the Great Crash and the Depression. Okay, are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
Their private businesses were under attack by Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal from above
Bad deal.
and labor from below.
It was a bad deal. It really was. It was a really bad deal. It's messed us all up now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Would you have said that if you were unemployed in 1935?
No.
There you go. We can debate whether it's relevant now.
To
but back then-
regain the upper hand, corporate leaders fought back on all fronts. They waged a figurative war in state houses and occasionally a literal one in the streets. Their campaigns extended from courts of law to the court of public opinion, but nothing worked particularly well until they began an inspired public relations offensive that cast capitalism as the handmaiden of Christianity.
Wait.
Dum, dum, dum.
Unpack that. What
Okay,
does that mean?
What they're saying is, after the stock market crashed in 1929,
Yes, I got that.
Roosevelt comes in with
Yes,
the New
does
Deal.
the terrible
so,
deal.
so big business leaders,
Stop saying that, or we're going to have to unpack what you're saying.
big business leaders felt threatened by the government because of all the New Deal legislation,
yeah.
and they felt threatened by unions who were organizing.
Like the Pulitzers and the Hearst.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
So these big business Republicans were trying to figure out, well, how do we create enough support in the population for our views as opposed to the New Deal and the labor
And I don't
unions?
think it was necessarily big business Republicans at that point. I think it was all big business.
It was just big business.
people.
And what they discovered in the 1930s and 40s was if we say that capitalism is linked to Christianity, we can get public support.
Because remember,
So that's how it happened?
this
Yes.
is after the Russian Revolution.
This is what he doesn't talk about in the article, which is really important.
Yes, and Marxism is on the rise. Socialism is on the rise.
Right.
Many liberals are embracing socialism.
Right.
This ultimately leads up in the 50s to the McCarthy trials
Right.
and that craziness and the Soviet and the Red Scare.
Oh, man, it's just getting worse and worse.
Yes. So throughout the 1930s and 1940s, corporate leaders marketed a new ideology that combined elements of Christianity with an anti-federal libertarianism.
Did they have some sort of big summit where they all sat down at a table and they all came up with this plan?
Actually, there was some of that.
Yes. Powerful business lobbies like the United States Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers led the way. Generous funding came from prominent businessmen like Harvey Firestone, Conrad Hilton, E.F. Hutton, Fred Maytag, Henry Luce.
Wow.
Leaders at U.S. Steel, General Motors, and DuPont. In a shrewd decision, these executives made clergymen their spokesmen.
What?
Yep.
3 in particular.
Well, let's just pause for a second here.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
pause for a second.
This is
you have,
riveting
you,
stuff.
you have to understand the larger geopolitical context of what's going on here, as Phil alluded to. You had the rise of socialist ideas.
Yes,
right?
bad, very bad. Almost as bad as the bad deal.
But what these capitalists figured out was, at least in Europe, socialism was becoming linked with atheism, right? The Soviet Union was an atheistic
That's
regime,
true.
Yes,
right?
godless.
Godless.
Godless communism.
So when socialist ideas like the New Deal started coming into the United States, they thought, how are we going to fight this? Even though many of the New Deal advocates were Christians, right? Because they were caring
Right,
about the
socialists,
poor. So
right.
they decided the best way to fight
I meant, I don't mean socialist.
Socialist?
I mean people that care about social issues.
Yeah.
So, and historically, when you go back into the 1800s, a lot of social reform was driven by Christians.
Of course.
Abolition,
As it should
child
be.
labor, 1900s.
Yeah.
1800s.
Well,
the
Abolition,
1800s.
19th
church
century.
was
18th century.
responsible.
19th
Right.
century.
So what these capitalists figured out was
Before the New Deal. You see, that's the whole problem.
Well-
then the New Deal came, and the New Deal said, "Oh, it's the government that's supposed to take care of all these socialists."
well,
Anyway, go ahead.
the government also took care of slavery. We couldn't have solved that without the government.
That's true.
So
Okay,
anyway,
go ahead.
the idea was that Christians, for the most part, were on the side of social reform. But then these capitalists came along and realized, you know what? The way to get public support is by linking these social reforms, socialism, with atheism. And we can link
That was a conscious decision?
Yes, and capitalism with Christianity.
How do you know that?
Because this is part of the history of how that worked.
The Reverend James Fifield, known as the 13th apostle of big business and St. Paul of the prosperous,
Can't even say that with a straight
emerged
face.
as an early evangelist for the cause. He had a national organization, Spiritual Mobilization, founded in 1935. He promoted freedom under God. Secondly, the Reverend Abraham Verede. Verede.
Spell it for us.
Verde.
Vereide.
Veride.
Verede?
Veride.
Veride.
Let's go with Verede. Advanced the Christian libertarian cause with a national network of prayer groups. He then in 1942, in Manhattan alone, Verede had followers like James Cash Penney, J.C. Penney,
That's his name?
Thomas Watson, founder or the head of IBM, Norman Vincent Peale,
Oh, I know him.
Mayor LaGuardia.
Worst airport in America.
It
We're
is.
all fans. It's not his fault. We're all fans of Verede. In 1942, his influence spread to Washington. He persuaded the House and Senate to start weekly prayer meetings in order that we might
That's
be,
how those started?
quote, in order that we might be a God-directed and God-controlled nation. The most important clergyman for Christian libertarianism, though, was the Reverend Billy Graham.
We're
Dun,
coming
dun,
like full
dun.
circle. This is like our whole podcast
In
like
his-
10 ago.
In his initial ministry in the early 1950s, Mr. Graham supported corporate interests so zealously that a London paper called him the big business
He
evangelist. The Garden
Henry
of...
Luce created Billy Graham's fame. I mean,
What?
What are you talking about?
Well, it was Hearst.
Hearst.
Went
Was
to
it
Luce.
Hearst?
Yeah, it
Luce,
was
yeah.
Randolph Hearst.
What are y'all talking about?
Billy Graham did his first big crusade in L.A. It was the one that...
1940.
48.
48.
Yeah, it was the one that...
Frank Zapparini.
Yes, Zapparini went to
playing ping
and
pong.
became a Christian after he came back from the Japanese prisoner of war camp in the movie Unbroken.
Oh,
Yes.
Yes.
Zamparelli.
Zamparelli. Whatever.
Okay, go ahead.
Zamboni.
Okay. And that what's it called when he did a crusade? Yes, so that crusade became such big news and went on so long that Randolph Hearst heard him speak and was so impressed with this young Christian firebrand.
and he was already a part of
And
this
Randolph
group.
Hearst was highly anti-socialist and anti-communist.
Right.
So he sent Henry Luce, who was the head of Time Magazine, founder of Time Magazine, a letter saying, Puff Graham.
Which is a great cereal.
Puff Graham.
What does that mean? Oh, it means build him up.
Build him up. Give him
Turn
press.
Turn him into a celebrity.
Right.
That's what turned Billy Graham into a
So
celebrity.
are you kidding me?
No, that's
Was
absolutely
I thought
true.
it was the Holy Spirit. Well, I did, honestly.
Worked through Hearst and Luce.
Yeah. So, in the Garden of Eden, early Billy Graham informed revival attendees, was a paradise with, quote, no union dues, no labor leaders, no snakes, no disease. Those are the four evils that he...
Wait.
Billy Graham,
Say that again? He
Billy
really
Graham,
said that?
He was making a joke about the Garden of Eden, that
Yes.
there's no unions.
That there was no unions.
I have to agree with that.
In the same spirit, he denounced all government restrictions in economic affairs, which he invariably attacked as, quote, socialism.
I think, but okay, we need to slow down for a second.
Oh, I'm having
Please,
so much fun.
Rather than
Don't
just
you have to somewhere to go?
yeah, I gotta get somewhere soon. Rather than just painting Graham as this huge pro-business guy, which
This is the angle they're pulling out for
I
this
know,
story.
but the reality is Graham was a very anti-communism guy.
Yes, he was.
And communism was associated with atheism. Therefore, capitalism became associated with Christianity. So at the end of the day, it isn't that Graham was all big business. It was he was anti-atheism.
Yeah,
is what
So
he was trying to
this
say.
anti-socialism.
whole thing is completely contrived
No.
by businessmen.
No,
and
but it was
hang
a
on.
significant
Bear-
factor in it.
All right.
These are the everything is made
getting
by
all worked up.
influences. I
I'm
know
sorry.
you are. You're going from orange to red.
I know.
Everything there's influences and there's backstory behind everything. In 1952, Graham went to Washington and made Congress his congregation. He recruited representatives to serve as ushers at packed revival meetings and staged the first formal religious service held on the Capitol steps. That year, at his urging, Congress established an annual National Day of Prayer. Graham said, "If I would run for president of the United States today on a platform of calling people back to God, back to Christ, back to the Bible," he predicted, "I'd be elected." Dwight D. Eisenhower fulfilled that prediction. With Mr. Graham offering scripture for Ike's speeches, the Republican nominee campaigned in what he called a great crusade for freedom. Elected in a landslide, Eisenhower told Mr. Graham that he had a mandate for a spiritual renewal. Now,
wow.
so Eisenhower...
Is this true? Do you
Yes.
Do you agree with this?
Yes.
This is true.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
and, that's interesting that the first religious ceremony on the steps of the Capitol didn't happen until the 1950s
Right.
with Billy Graham.
And you said the whole evangelical movement basically started with Billy Graham.
Well, in the modern sense,
now
yeah.
we have proof.
Rallying the country, Eisenhower advanced a revolutionary array of new religious ceremonies and slogans. The first week of February 1953 set the dizzying pace. On Sunday morning, he was baptized. That night, he broadcast an Oval Office address for the American Legion's Back to God campaign. On Thursday, he appeared with Mr. Veriday at the inaugural National Prayer Breakfast. On Friday, he instituted the first opening prayer at a cabinet meeting. The
First time that's ever happened was in 1953.
I'm just stunned.
The rest of Washington consecrated itself too. The Pentagon, State Department, and other executive agencies quickly instituted prayer services of their own. In 1954, the very next year, Congress added "Under God" to the previously secular Pledge of Allegiance.
Really?
Yep.
It placed a similar slogan, "In God We Trust," on postage that year and voted the following year to add it to paper money. In 1956, "In God We Trust" became the nation's official motto.
I had no idea.
All of that happened in 3 years of Eisenhower becoming president, with Billy Graham giving him scripture to use in his talks under the back to the God, under God.
I'm like so stunned. Talk about trying to control God to allay your fears.
Well, I think, you got to put it in the broader context of the Cold War. This is when the Soviet Union and the United States were engaged in a global PR battle, and it was atheism versus Christianity, and it was communism versus capitalism. And so the more you could differentiate the United States from the Soviets, the better. And that's what a lot of this is all about.
Wow.
So, and this is the end of this piece. During these years, Americans were told time and time again, not just that the country should be a Christian nation, but that it had always been one. They soon came to think of the United States as one nation under God, and they believed it ever
We
since.
were brainwashed.
Well, it's not that we were brainwashed. So this all emerged in the 1950s, but when we look back, we think it was there from 1776, or we think it was there from the Pilgrims in 1620, but it hasn't been. This is a largely modern, recent...
The Pledge of Allegiance was
Yeah.
secular
Well, you can go
until
back and say, you can logically connect, clearly, we are a Christian nation because of all the use of God back in 1776.
Yeah, but the irony is it's not there.
The Plymouth, Rock people, the Pilgrims, that's what they were.
the rock people from Plymouth.
The Plymouth Rockers. My
because they
favorite
came
group.
here for religious freedom.
So, well, here's two details that should kind of skew that a little bit. First of all, the Constitution of the United States, one of the main barriers for it being ratified by the states, were so many people objected to the Constitution because it made no mention of God at all. It's a completely secular document. Unlike the Declaration of Independence, which at least mentions,
Right.
God
The
as
creator.
the creator, right? But there's zero mention of God in the Constitution, and they didn't. That was quite intentional. Secondly, church attendance in the United States as a percentage of the population is far higher now than it was in 1776.
How do you know that?
Because I was a history major and I studied this.
All right, I'll believe
So
you.
what we do is we paint it backwards and we see through the lens of, of course we're a Christian nation. Of course the Pilgrims are the only people who settled this land, never mind all the secular colonists that came throughout the colonies, but we only focus on the Pilgrims. And we kind of whitewash the past to make it look far more Christian than it really was. And since the 1950s and the Cold War, we've had a political agenda for doing that because we wanted to strengthen our hand against the communists.
Well, and then let's just not forget 1980 when the Republicans decided that, we truly were going to embrace, Christianity for the cause.
Did that happen in 1980?
Oh yeah, I mean it was the religious right, the moral majority.
Right, when Reagan was running.
Yeah, Ralph Reed.
But
Thank you very much.
we had our first Southern Baptist Sunday school teaching president before then.
And Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter.
But he was a Democrat.
He was the first born
But
again.
he wasn't a real
but
Christian.
He was born again. He taught Sunday school.
Newsweek, cover of
we were
Newsweek.
confused by that,
Yeah,
but you know.
Reagan did astrology with his
No,
wife.
no, that was his wife.
Newsweek, the cover of Newsweek, some issue in 1976 declared it the year of the evangelicals.
1976.
1976,
Well,
year I was
that
born, by the way.
That was like plowing the fields for 1980,
It
quite
was.
honestly.
Well, and you got to remember, it was after the sexual revolution of the 60s.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
after Roe v. Wade in 1972.
Right.
So by 76, it was the first election where abortion and social issues of a sexual nature came to the forefront, which galvanized the religious right in Ronald Reagan in 1980. But Reagan's also major platform was anti-communism and
That's
a very
true.
hard stance against
Right.
Very
which
pro-military.
goes all the way back to
Godless
goes back to Eisenhower, Billy Graham, all those things that created
Well,
this
and-
Christian nation idea.
So basically, it's all because of Randolph Hearst.
Something like that.
What America
if you have to
is
boil
today.
it down, I told you,
It does show
Pulitzer
you.
and Hearst.
It shows you the power of the media.
Wow. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to go about my day.
So
Well,
this
I
is-
have
so
to, so we gotta
mind-blowing,
wrap
but
up.
mind-blowing.
Okay, we got to wrap it up. This was a
So
book.
your point, Phil?
This is a book, Kevin Cruz, professor of history at Princeton and the author most recently of One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America. That's a somewhat provocative title for a book.
Sure is.
Now, we've talked before, I think, about how retailers kind of created Christmas.
Right.
Because they made such a big deal out of Christmas to encourage shopping that it became bigger and bigger
Right.
than it had ever been.
And it continues.
Yeah.
And then Hallmark created Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And Secretary's Day.
and Secretary
in the beginning,
Teacher's
like
Day.
the Puritans refused to even celebrate Christmas because they thought it was a pagan holiday. Most Christians,
But we forget. And we look back and we think, oh man, 200 years ago, it was perfect. We were all in Bible studies together, celebrating these lush Christmases that were all about Jesus.
and we had our slaves to take care of us. and everything was so much better 200 years ago. Right.
At least I could help you put up the tree.
Oh, I think it's time to end.
If you think this story is tragic, just remember to not use magic because the Bible says no. We can't go there. You can't use magic to prevent the nation from becoming less Christian. That's probably a misnomer, as we've learned, haven't we, Christian?
Absolutely.
And history is a little more fuzzy than we'd like it to be. Oh, my sister Muzzy. It's not her real name. I just use that sometimes as a term of endearment because
You've lost yourself.
the story is never as clear as you'd like. So get on your motorcycle and get on your bike and go tell your neighbors and your friends that we can be a little clear in the end. If we learn our history from the beginning, then we won't tell each other that we're sinning to say that we should go see Selma instead of American Sniper.
I was kind of following him along
Yeah.
until like the last part.
Well, the guy got fired because he told people to go see Selma, not American Sniper.
Oh, now I'm
because
with
they
you.
said he was sinning.
Hey, you did. I think you got all of our stories
I
in
wrapped
there.
it up. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Sorry
All
for
right.
criticizing.
This guy has to go. See you next week.
Bye,
guys.
everybody.